Hey, this is Anney.
And Samantha.
And welcome to Stuff I Never Told You, a production of iHeartRadio.
And welcome to another Feminist Around the World. And today we wanted to feature an Indigenous activist as yesterday, not that you guys are listening when it's being published, but was actually Indigenous People Day here in the U.S. So like October 14th, around that time is what used to be Columbus Day. But we don't want to necessarily celebrate a colonizer who stole people's identities and property. So of course, we're going to talk about Indigenous Peoples Day. And so with that coming and going, we're talking about activist and lawyer Sara Omi. So Omi is an Embera lawyer who has been working to advocate for her community and the environment. And though her work alone is something that we should be celebrating, she has made history becoming the first Indigenous woman lawyer in Panama, which I thought was really, really significant. In one article, Anney, they featured like how many people within their community go on to law school or graduate from law school, and it's like a 3-to-1, so 3 men to 1 woman in general. So according to a lot of the stats, it's obviously overwhelmingly men who are in this field and in getting education alone. So she decided at a young age, around 15, that she was going to go down this path, that she needed to do something for her community, and that one of the things that she knows that has some power is education, and then also knowing policies and law. So she went down this route, which was amazing. So Omi's journey has been heavily influenced by her family and her community and her calling to fight for them and for herself. So ICO Americas was able to sit down and talk with her about herself and her works in 2023. So here's what she told them about why she wanted to go into law and her work. She said, "I was born in a moment of conflict. My community had been relocated and was seeking ways to survive. Everything was in short supply and there were no opportunities. Women and young people had no voice. My mother was the first female Embera chief, and throughout my childhood, I watched her fight for the rights of our relocated community. From when I was very young, I wanted to go to school so I could become a lawyer and support my mother in her pursuit of justice. I was lucky. My parents understood education was the way to change things, even though at the time it was not normal for Embera girls to be sent to primary school. I left my village at the age of 15 so I could continue my studies, and thanks to scholarships from this Catholic church, I graduated as a lawyer at the age of 22. Even when I was far away from my community, I never lost my connection with my village, and I always dreamt of returning to help my people in their search for better economic, social, and political opportunities, to fight against the invasion of our territory by non-Indigenous communities, and to defend women and Indigenous communities from violence and discrimination." So her family has always made sure she knew and understood the legacy of her people, including the uprooting of her people. Here's some information about that from elpas.com. They write, "From family stories, Omi learned early on about the uprooting that her people had to endure. It happened between 1972 and 1976 when the construction of the Valales hydroelectric dam on the Bayano River flooded the land they inhabited and forced them to rebuild their lives elsewhere. This opened a community wound and motivated an international claim recognized in 2014 by a ruling by the Inter-American Court of Human Rights." So a lot of history, a lot of hurt, especially when it comes to the uprooting of an entire Indigenous community. Yeah, so we know that there's a lot more to that history than we're getting into, but just to pinpoint that. And so when she returned back to her community, she was able to assess the level of needs, not only for her community, but for many other Indigenous communities around them. She told the Latin America and Caribbean sector for the UN Women's Organization, quote, "When I arrived in Panama City, I thought that the problems only existed in my community, but I realized that all Indigenous peoples face the same needs, and that is where I became concerned as a young person and decided to become part of the organization of Embera Nunan Youth of Panama, or OJEWP. That is where I learned about the rights of Indigenous peoples, and I support the political agenda to ensure the fundamental rights of our people." And she went on talking specifically about the lack of women when it comes to being a part of the solutions for the issues, saying, "Knowing all the difficulties of our people and the lack of participation of women in decision-making at the level of our traditional structures, I accepted the challenge of participating and being a traditional authority in the position of president of the General Embera Congress of Alto Baiano. Then, in search of occupying a more visible space in my territory, a year ago, I dared to challenge the traditional structure to be the only female candidate to aspire to the position of General Chief of said Congress. Because we are the women who desire better opportunities on a personal, family, and community level. With the help of breaking the barriers of violence against girls, boys, and women in the community, and trying to seek better living conditions without straying from our Embera worldview. So she's been really vocal about the importance of Indigenous women being a part of this conversation when it comes to Indigenous rights, and also for the fight against climate change. And we've seen that over and over and over again when we talk about Indigenous peoples and activists. So here's a quote from the EcoAmericas.com interview. Indigenous women are the guardians of traditional knowledge about planting food, protection of the forest, water, biodiversity, and other ancestral spiritual practices. It has always been women's role to transmit that knowledge to current and future generations, yet that all-important responsibility has always been made invisible. We were just seen as women at home. Women in our communities have so many tools, but in the past, we had no way to put that ancestral knowledge on the table and use our skills to accompany our community's process of development. From the fight for territory, the fight for development with dignity, the protection of traditional values, our cosmovision, all of these can now be positioned at territorial and national level. We have worked to bring our role to light and position the voice of women in Indigenous communities so that we can exert our influence. Climate change is very present in our communities, and women are on the front line of its effects, enduring crop failure and extreme weather conditions, for example. We work hard to restore the forest, leading the process and applying our ancestral knowledge. Again, I think that's been a common theme when we talk about Indigenous peoples, when we talk about the community and activism itself, that the women are the front line. And we know this as a tradition in general because they are, even biblically, which we kind of talked about, held responsible for teaching traditions and passing those down in those stories. So I think it's one of those conversations where we talk about the importance of remembering cultures and traditions, and especially if it's in honoring a good system. I think we should, that keyword being good. Mm-hmm. So, and with that, it's not surprising that she would become a part of the leaderships for different programs and organizations to continue with the much-needed conversation. She's the founder of the Embera Artisan Women Association, or Amari Embera, which works to promote the culture and empower the Embera women by passing on the traditions and preserving their cultural knowledge. She was also the president, and I believe she is now a spokesperson and coordinator for the territorial women leaders of the Mesoamerican Alliance of People and Forests, and a spokesperson for the women of the Global Alliance of Territorial Communities. And as a representative, she has used her platform to continue the conversation of the importance of women in the community. Like we said before, she told elpas.com, women maintain the balance that the family needs. They protect the family and the community. It is women who are active, better organized, concerned every day with maintaining identity. In my case, influencing the creation of public policies that integrate the vision of Indigenous women and that achieve concrete results in the territory. And she told climateforest.org about what her organizations are doing in regards to climate change. She said, the women in my organizations, both locally and across Panama, are proposing various alternatives to combat the effects of climate change and to recover and preserve our traditional knowledge. For instance, by creating botanical gardens made by women to promote this knowledge. We are working hard on sustainable economic empowerment through our identity. Where do we want to go? We are proposing our initiatives and our alternatives to be able to continue working with the balance that our Mother Earth needs. We are also working on how families can subsist despite the current and future challenges to food security. We are working with the concept of the living forest, with the traditional medicine, food security, agricultural production, which are important tools to maintain the balance and protection of our Mother Earth. And when she was asked about some of of her biggest challenges. She told them, the biggest challenges that we have, especially as women, is our access to full and effective participation in all spaces. We currently lack strategic allies that can help us to promote our positions. We also need compensation for the yearly losses that our communities suffer because of climate change. It impacts us severely and disrupts life in our territories. We need to fight these challenges on the grounds of our own vision, especially the vision we have as women. But again, with the challenges, she also has hope. From the Eco Americas interview, she says, I'm optimistic that there will be a positive change. Those changes depend on us being committed to repairing and restoring our Mother Earth. With our influence, power, and voices, we will be able to ensure that there are more women leaders who can unify our message in a single voice so that in the near future, rights can be respected and there can be full and effective participation of Indigenous people and women in the dialogue. I aspire to see more women leading the process of social and environmental justice. And from the lac.unwomen.org, they asked her what her message was for the younger Indigenous women and generations. And she said, my message to the youth is that they have the responsibility to keep the essence of our Indigenous peoples alive. They need to be present in our struggles and value this knowledge as an essential tool representing the voices of women and our grandparents, and that without their participation, the development to which we aspire as Indigenous people, women and youth, will not be possible. Yeah, Anney, you missed out on our previous feature with Gwalinga. But she is a younger generation, her and her sister, of Indigenous people who have been putting in this fight and making sure that their culture and their community are preserved and that they are fighting for not only their land, but again, for their people. So we've seen this example, and we know if anybody rallies and answers these calls, it is the Indigenous peoples, and it is a lot of the Indigenous young peoples. So it's amazing to see. But for Ami, her work continues to be acknowledged, and not just with her leadership, but also being nominated for her work, including being named 100 most powerful women by Forbes Central America for 2 years in a row. I don't know if the 2024 list has come out, but 2023, she was on that list. So we'll see if she's back on that list, because I'm sure she definitely deserves it with all of her amazing works. And yeah, we'll come back. I'm sure we're going to do a roundup soon about where are they now conversations, if we can find them.
Yes. I like that idea. Okay.
Yeah, we did that before. We were like, we had some good and some bad. We're like, oh no.
Good and bad. Yeah. Well, we'll see. Look forward to that, listeners. In the meantime, if you would like to contact us, you can email us at stuffmediamomstuff@iheartmedia.com. You can find us on Twitter at momstuffpodcast, or on Instagram and TikTok at Stuff I Never Told You. We have a TeePublic store, and we have a book you can get wherever you get your books. Thanks as always to our super producer Christina, our executive producer Maya, and our contributor Joey.
Thank you.
And thanks to you for listening. Stuff I Never Told You is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, you can listen to the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcast, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.